What's America thinking? Well, we hit the streets and found out that voters are really feeling the disconnect between Washington and their own realities.
I don't necessarily feel like they understand the concerns of Americans. I feel like right now it's just one team versus another.
I feel like we vote a lot of the time so strongly for our views and who represents them, but we don't necessarily look always at the character of the people we're voting for.
Well, I think they're mostly bought and paid for by the, lobbyists and the corporate America. And I'm a Republican.
I definitely feel as if there's a disconnect, especially with less privileged communities in America.
I definitely think the younger generation is kind of pushed away more rather than, listened to. And I think it's really important that the younger generation is more listened to now, especially because, I think we're the next big chapter.
We know Americans are not always feeling heard, but that didn't stop some voters from braving the blizzard to show support for their candidates in Iowa earlier this week. But what do the results of the Iowa caucus represent going forward? We're going on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Scott, just to jump into it, I was just in Iowa and all eyes were on Trump, who swept the caucus with a commanding 51% of the votes. A lot of major media outlets called it less than an hour after the caucuses started. So do you think that plays into America's skepticism about the election process?
It certainly does on the Republican side. Polls, News Nation, The Hill, DDHQ polls show that anywhere from 40 to 50% of Republicans don't necessarily trust the election results from 2020. And this is repeated by Pew and Gallup studies. And it's certainly a change from 15, 20 years ago when there was 80 to 90% confidence in how America conducts its elections. So this is certainly feeding into a fear of what America's thinking.
And, I guess the quickness of those results certainly surprised me on caucus night. I mean, I barely made it to DeSantis HQ in time for that event to start. But from your perspective, were there any surprises for you out of the Hawkeye state last week?
You know what? Internally, I didn't think Donald Trump would crack 50%. So his 51% showing, he outperformed the polls a little bit, or certainly the Hill's DDHQ average. Ron DeSantis outperformed his average as well, and Nikki Haley outperformed her average, but not by as much as Ron DeSantis. But again, the headline here is Donald Trump getting above 50%. And I understand a lot of people are saying, well, there's 50% of that electorate that didn't vote for him, but that's an improvement from his mark in 2016 when he came in second and only got about 28% of the vote. So, his popularity has grown among the Republican electorate, and we see that in Iowa, and I think we're going to see that in New Hampshire too.
That 50% number was certainly being thrown around in speculative conversations leading up to the caucuses. But $124 million were spent on Iowa campaign ads in the state, with only 110,000 people turning out to vote. That's more than $1,000 a person. Do you think it was worth it?
If you're Donald Trump and you spend significantly less per voter, you've certainly got your ROI. If you're Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, you're averaging over $1,100, over $1,000 a vote, and potentially one or two more states left, I don't think you think it's worth it. It's interesting. We look at these numbers, cost per vote, quite a bit. And it's generally the candidates who are cheaper cost per vote are the ones who prevail. And it's usually because their earned media, their charisma, and how they connect with voters is really what gets them across the line, not these very expensive 30-second ads.
Right now, Decision Desk HQ is showing Trump beating Biden nationally by 1.3%. Do you think Trump will carry this momentum into New Hampshire and the rest of the country going forward?
It certainly looks like that. I know there was one poll out of New Hampshire that had Nikki Haley tied with Donald Trump. But again, I'm a person of the averages. I want to look at all the different numbers. And Donald Trump is still holding an 8 to 9 point lead in the averages. Now, that is down from where he was, say, a few weeks ago when he had a 10-plus point lead in New Hampshire. But the wind is behind his back. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are certainly going to fight it out. Unless they surprise someone in New Hampshire, or surprise Donald Trump in New Hampshire or South Carolina, I think Donald Trump's got a decent chance, probably better than 50-50 chance of potentially winning every single state in this GOP primary.
Trump won New Hampshire in 2016. He carried Iowa this week with the support of evangelicals who are not as big in New Hampshire. So what does Trump's coalition look like in the Granite State?
Well, when you win more than 50% of the vote in Iowa, you can say, look, you won the evangelicals, you won
Yeah.
some of the moderates, you won some of the social conservatives and fiscal conservatives. In New Hampshire, if he cracks 50%, he could probably say the same thing. The only thing I would say is New Hampshire is a little unique. They let Democrats and independents potentially vote in their primary. There's not a competitive Democratic primary. So the vote, the people who are going to vote in that GOP primary may represent a little bit more of America than just the GOP electorate, because you're going to see some independent voters, potentially some voters who voted for Biden last time, come out and turn out for Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis.
That's really interesting because Decision Desk's most recent numbers show Haley trailing Trump by single digits in New Hampshire. After Iowa, should she be worried, and what does she need to do to stay in the race, not only in New Hampshire, but going to her home state of South Carolina and beyond?
So it's two things. She needs to be worried about perception, right? So campaigns are about meeting expectations, or at least meeting expectations, if not beating them. She's the governor, or former governor of South Carolina, so she's going to be expected to win there. She staked a lot of her reputation on New Hampshire, so she needs to perform there. But what ultimately keeps these candidates in or out of the field is how much money they have. Can they afford to get on a plane to that next state? She has shown her cash on hand at $12 million as recently as the first week of January. We're not sure what Ron DeSantis's is, but she's going to need to at least meet or beat expectations and have enough money to get on that plane to that next state.
Certainly all about the money in these presidential races and in U.S. politics in general. Scott Tranter, thank you so much for breaking down the numbers.
Thanks for having me.
Make sure to check out the Hill's Decision Desk HQ for all of the latest updates going into the 2024 election. More What's America Thinking coming right up.